I was rushing home from work. It was already dark and frosty. December is no matter how. Since I worked in one city and lived in another, I had to ride an electric train. In the morning to work, in the evening home. The road took just under an hour. It's Friday, the mood is high. Having climbed the deserted platform, I began to wait for the train. There is not a soul on the platform. It was on the outskirts next to the industrial zone, and here, as a rule, there were always not many people, but today it is completely empty. Taking out the phone, I began to search for something on the internet. Once the train crept up quietly, I was still pleasantly surprised that it jumped 5 minutes earlier. It doesn't often happen. This fact just added positivity, and I literally jumped into her open doors. I already wanted to warm up in a warm carriage. It was 25 degrees outside with a huge minus. Entering the warm carriage, I directly felt how the mood level jumped by another dozen points. In addition, the car was absolutely empty. Get where you want. Beauty. Soon I will be at home and ahead of 2 days of the weekend, for which I have a lot of plans. As soon as I sat down more conveniently, the train started and began to pick up speed. I was stuck on the internet, but it was not there. The entire connection with the outside world was somehow interrupted in the phone. I directly did not even expect such a dirty trick from my faithful Samsung. 2 SIM cards, and both are not online. Rebooted the phone. The same picture. Well, come on. This minor trouble could not spoil my mood. I took out my headphones and turned on the audiobook, and waiting for the conductor, leaned back. A monotonous voice bubbled in the headphones, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, a thought slipped through my head. Did I pass by? My heart boarded up, and I immediately looked at the time. I have been going for about an hour. Now there should be my station. But the train still rushes without slowing down. Outside the windows at night, the moon and the forest. Endless, some kind of forest. And from the right and from the left, there is still no soul in the carriage. It became somehow uncomfortable. I looked at the electronic scoreboard with a running line, but it's empty there. I'm back in the phone. There's still no connection. Let me think. I will go forward along the cars and ask people what was the last stop. I put my phone with headphones in my pocket. I'm going to the next car, empty, going on. Probably 5 semi-dark cars passed. Not a soul. The gaze fell on the emergency communication button. I approach it, press. From the speakers, a wild rattle and hiss hit the membranes. From surprise, I already bounced back. Thoughts darted in my head, and I didn't know what to do. I looked at the stop crane. It was torn off. The right hand rose to scratch the back of my head, and then I remembered that I had a hat. I left it in the seat in the car that I entered at the station. I hurriedly moved back behind the hat. Along the way, I noticed that the stop taps are torn off everywhere. From this, anxiety only increases. But if I knew what was waiting for me on the way to my carriage, I would not have gone back at all. But I didn't know. In general, I overcome 3 cars in the direction of the tail, go to the next, and from the opposite end it enters the car. When I saw him, he was numb right in the door. Sweat pierced me and my legs almost buckled, and some kind of wheeze broke out of the throat. It was huge height and width, and slowly went to meet me on huge bare legs. In shape, the legs were like human-only size. The size of each foot was from a children's sled. One dusty lamp burned in the carriage. It lit like a moon, a mystical picture that seemed to me like a dream. The huge hands of the creature, with palms like excavator buckets, were taken to the floor. His fingers were the thickness of my arm, and he had to slouch to walk the height of the carriage. A huge belly hung over his pants. This mutant was dressed in the shape of a conductor, which was also huge in size but bursting at the seams from her bursting body. The uniform was dirty and tattered. A large, battered conductor leather bag hung over the shoulder on the strap. But the worst thing was that it was sitting on the shoulders. It was a huge bald head, all scarred without eyeballs, with eyelids sewn with a mattress seam. The mouth was of such size that a medium watermelon could fit in it entirely. The monster slowly walked forward, while groping each seat with its own streams. He carefully checked the entire space in the carriage. I felt under the seats themselves, and even felt the luggage shelves. At the same time, he mumbled something not articulate, snorted, snoozed, and wheezed. Sometimes it was possible to disassemble growling words. Present a ticket, and then ye ticket, present. Then the car shook and my stupor passed. I quickly turned around and jerked back. I ran 10 cars, or maybe all 15, until the figure of a sitting person flashed to my right. My brain did not immediately react to this information, and my legs out of fear did not obey the order to stop, so I swept to the vestibule and was able to stop my legs with an effort of will. He turned around and looked at the man. The man was napping at the window approximately in the middle of the car. I jumped to him to wake him up, and when I grabbed him by the shoulder, he woke up. "We run from here, otherwise we are finished. There is a mutant," excitedly shouted me. It was you who met the conductor." The passenger smirked bitterly. I was somehow taken aback by his calm. I opened my mouth to say something, but all the words in my head were completely confused. "Don't worry, I'll tell you everything now," suggested by a stranger. His calm tone affected me. My cotton legs bent, and I sat down opposite the interlocutor. And he continued. "Between us and the conductor of the cars, 10-12, as you probably noticed, the conductor is blind and moves very slowly. It takes him about 20 minutes to feel the entire carriage, vestibule, and squeeze into the next. So he will get to our car in 3 hours. So I have time to explain to you what is happening here. What's going on here?" I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "My name is Georgi Alexandrovich. You can just Uncle Jora. I am a passenger of a ghostly train, and you are now too." I caught my breath and saw the fellow traveler. He was 2 times older than me, looking about 60 years old, intelligent in appearance, with a small graying goatee, a slightly crumpled dark hat on his head, and he was wearing a dark coat, which also looked a little crumpled. "Why did you call the train ghostly, and when will my station be?" I kept asking, choosing the most pressing questions of those that swarmed in my head. "Your station won't be there. This train is in a different dimension to our world with you," Uncle Jor said sympathetically, and continued. "It will be difficult for you to understand all this now, but I will try to explain. The situation is this. You and I fell into a parallel dimension. This train sometimes stops at stations and picks up passengers. Moreover, it takes passengers from then the measurement into this is parallel. It's always just one passenger, and it is impossible to get out of it back into our world." "How is that?" I asked incredulously. "Look out the window. What do you see?" he said. "It's dark," I answered. "Exactly." Confirmed by my interlocutor. It's always night in this world, and the train rushes among the endless winter taiga. On both sides are trees, infinite coniferous ocean, and frost. I've been going for over a month, although the concept of time is very conditional here, and nothing changes outside the window. Only occasionally there are stations, abandoned, deserted, among the endless taiga. And after the train makes a stop on them, a new passenger appears in it. At the last station, you entered it. Why didn't you get off the train at that moment? Did I ask? The one who comes out of it remains in an abandoned station amid the frosty taiga of this strange world, and dies either from the cold or... Then my interlocutor fell silent. "What? Or?" I whispered. "Have you seen the conductor?" he asked. "So imagine what monsters are found in this taiga. This train is like a check valve. It lets people from our world into its world, but I don't know how to get back. All this looked like some kind of nonsense or evil prank. Tonight I got on the train to get home, but it was not clear where I got. Communication is not working. I can't get out, but there must be some way out. Listen, and if you go forward along the movement of the train, then you can walk to the electric locomotive, and there the drivers." I began to reason. "It's in vain." My companion interrupted me. "Firstly, I am even afraid to imagine what the drivers look like here, and secondly, the train is endless, or rather, it is groundless." "How can it be?" I was perplexed. "Do not forget, my friend. We are in another world. The laws of our world do not work here. I have been moving forward on the carriages for more than a month. The conductor is adjusting. In general, she has no beginning, but she ends immediately after the conductor. When he passes the next carriage, he immediately disappears. It's like it dissolves in the air. "Who is this conductor?" I asked. "One of the natives of this world," he explained. "This world is inhabited by mutants, each of whom is sharpened for a specific task. In addition to the conductor, there are road workers, cashiers at station ticket offices, and even law enforcement officers. All of them are extremely aggressive, and we are just food for them. I saw the conductor eat Herman. He grabbed it with his creak like a pie, first bit off his head, and then devoured all of Herman without the rest. Until now, as I remember, my legs are coughing up." "What kind of Herman?" I exhaled. "Herman became a passenger a few days after me." Uncle Jora began to tell. "I measure a day with a wristwatch. The sun is not here. And then Herman had a theory that you can leave the train if you are behind the conductor. And Herman decided to hide under the seat in the hope that the conductor was blind and would not find him. But the conductor groped him. I tried to talk Herman out of it," Uncle Jora lamented. "But he didn't listen to me. And I stood in the vestibule and watched, and when the conductor grabbed him, then that crunch of the skull. In general, a terrible sight. After what I saw, I probably ran 20 cars. Everything could not calm down. Still goosebumps." Uncle Zor fell silent, and I also did not know what to say. I tried to build some sane picture of what was happening to me. But it wasn't easy. My brain did not hold a non-initial train, could not understand how I penetrated into another world and what to do with all this. "You're not hungry?" Uncle Jor once asked his father. His question pulled me out of the chaos of my thinking, and I felt like I wanted to eat brutally. "Yes, there is a little." I was embarrassed. Uncle Jor put forward a sports bag from under the bench and began to extract bundles from it. "Here is chicken in foil, bread, tomatoes, cucumber, half a shot of soda," he listed. "And where you got the food from?" I was surprised. "After all, you have been here for a long time." This is another oddity of this train. Unwrapping the chicken, he began to explain. "The fact is that moving along the carriages, we find different bags of food and water in some of them. They look as if the passenger got out at his station and forgot his luggage. And we do not know where these bags really come from. It seems that someone does not want us to starve to death here. And what, besides us, there are still passengers here." "Chewing chicken?" I asked. "Yes, Lesh and Sergei. But they went far ahead. Lesh, once I found a note in which it was said that there is a portal in the train through which you can return to our world. An unknown passenger explained in it that this portal constantly moves forward along the wagons. It is somehow synchronized with the conductor and is always ahead of him by 1,000 wagons. So they went looking for him. It seems to them that they will find a way out." "Cutting tomatoes and bread," told Uncle Jora. "But I think that there is no portal. On this, I am in no hurry." A huge moon hung in the sky outside the windows, illuminating the endless taiga with pale ash light. The wheels, like the hooves of some mythical horse, beat rhythmically on the railway. Two people in half the darkness, a chicken in an empty carriage of a strange train without a start, which was not known anywhere in the vastness of an incomprehensible world. It is difficult to imagine a more mystical picture. I thought I was scooping cucumber. "It's time for us to come forward," said Uncle Jora, glossing at the clock. "The conductor will be here soon. By the way, you never introduced yourself as a young man. What is your name?" he continued. "Valera. And you can do it," I answered. "Very nice." He got up. "Let's get Valera out of here until the conductor comes." Uncle Jora took his bag, and we walked on empty cars, away from the conductor. "Count the cars past, and I will count, then compare." He turned to me. and I began to bend my fingers, passing the next carriage. We walked 7 carriages, and in front of the door of the 8th, Uncle Jorah abruptly stopped and raised his hand. I understood his gesture and also froze. A second later, he pointed his finger into the twilight space of the carriage in front of us. I looked closely and saw a man lying on the floor. He lay between the rows of seats, his legs towards us, and in his right palm, something white was sandwiched. The man did not move, and only the train shook him from side to side, from time to time. Uncle Zor began to whisper. The train presents passengers with a car with a surprise. Surprises are different, but as a rule, they are always deadly. As if an evil experimenter is conducting dangerous experiments on us. At these moments, you need to be extremely careful. "What are we going to do?" I whispered. "You're standing here and I'm going to look," Uncle Zor quietly commanded. He lowered the bag to the floor, slowly pushed the car doors apart, just enough to squeeze sideways, and sneak towards the figure on the floor. I was ready to come to his aid at any second. I stayed to watch. Having climbed to the lying on the floor, he leaned over, then touched him with his hand, and after a second sharply recoiled and sat down next to the seat. Then he called me with a gesture. I approached carefully. "This is Sergei," Uncle Zor said mournfully. "He's dead." Then he leaned over and pulled a piece of paper out of Sergei's palm. It was a note from Leohi. I never realized what had happened. Lech wrote in his note. Sergei said that he wanted to pour the pardon and stayed in the vestibule, and I went to the next carriage. I waited 10 minutes for him, then went after him. And he's gone. 3 more carriages passed back, empty. I thought that he decided to return to you and did not look for him anymore. I moved forward in search of the portal, and after 14 cars, I see him on the floor, dead. No signs of violence, but how did he end up ahead of me? For almost 10 cars. Uncle Jorah, be careful. Man, what about the corpse now? There is nowhere to bury, and it seems not convenient to leave it like that. Can we burn it? Cremation is like a funeral. I suggested it, and let the whole carriage burn to the yoke of the hairdryer. What should we lose? No way. Do not dare to set fire to anything. Uncle Jorah was worried. We have already tried to burn the car. We thought we would set it on fire right in front of the conductor, and if the conductor burns in it, then we will fall into our dimension. Yes, that was not the case. As soon as the fire from the seats began to be made, a firefighter immediately appeared. Somewhere in the vestibule, materialized from the conductor. Monster, I will tell you, no worse than a conductor, only sighted and wearing a helmet. Yes, and he also has a fire extinguisher. We almost put away the bricks when we saw him. And he extinguished the fire from the fire extinguisher, the crimson at the ready, and behind us running. Roars like a wounded bull. The doors between the cars kick out. I don't know how many wagons we ran from him, and when I fell without strength, I thought cranes to me. But it disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. In general, I do not advise you to indulge with fire here. Yes, here I see not much. I was impressed by the story. Whose baggage is that? I pointed my finger at a dark backpack on the floor under one of the seats. I don't know. Let's look, suggested Uncle Jorah. I put the backpack on the seat, opened the lightning, and we began to study the contents. It turned out to have a few boiled eggs, slicing sausage raw, smoked, some bread, a couple of apples, and a thermos with hot tea. In the inner pocket of the backpack, we found some money, about 2,000 rubles, some checks, keys, and a ticket for this train. And then, seeing this ticket, I had an idea. Uncle Jor, because the conductor demands a ticket, and let's try to present this ticket to him. After all, then we will find ourselves on the other side of the conductor, and will be able to get into our world. First of all, we only have one ticket. Uncle Jor began to reason. And secondly, it is dangerous. Suddenly the conductor will not like something. He will gobble up and will not ask for his last name. It would be necessary to experiment with this ticket for a start, but at a safe distance. And then we both looked at Sergei's body. The conductor, after all, when he finds him on the floor and stowaway, he will devour him for anything, and we will still not be able to hide him anywhere. Let's sit Seryoga in the seat and put this ticket in his hand, and we will observe what the conductor will do, suggested Uncle Jora. I nodded silently. That's what we did. Seryoga looked like a sleeping passenger. We sat him at the window, facing the tail of the train right at the entrance to the car. A ticket found in a backpack was placed in his right hand. Uncle Jora and I moved to the beginning of the carriage and began to wait for the conductor, briefly talking. Uncle Jor, why was all the food in the backpack fresh and even tea in the thermos hot? I asked. In this train, always so. All the lag we found in it looks as if some absent-minded passenger had just forgotten it. He answered, "Here's a pancake. I feel like some kind of rabbit over which experiments are put and fed so as not to die of hunger." I lamented. I would find out who this evil genius who mocks us like that. Yes, there is no genius. Just a person knows little even about the world in which he lives, Uncle Jora said. And what can we say about those laws that reign in neighboring worlds? You have to be able to adjust, he continued. We must try to understand what is happening here. Delve into the rules of the game, so to speak, and then we may find a way out. Some time passed, and we heard the door slamming between the cars and realized that the conductor had reached our car. It was very not pleasant to be in the same carriage with him, and scary. Therefore, Uncle Jora and I went out into the vestibule and began to watch what was happening through the glass of closed doors. It was calmer. We saw how the conductor muttered some nonsense squeezed into the carriage and began to carefully probe the entire space. He walked his stream around the seat where Sariga's body was sitting and groped his hand with a ticket. Carefully took a ticket, then took out some device from his bag, put a ticket into it. A red light bulb caught fire on the device and a long, unpleasant sound sounded. The conductor began to scream excitedly, grabbed the poor Seryogino's body and bit off his head in one fell swoop. I vomited right on the glass through which we watched. Uncle Jora grabbed my hand and began to take me away from the conductor. The experiment failed. The conductor's apparatus does not recognize tickets from our world. We were overwhelmed by despair mixed with disappointment, and besides, fear drove us to leave as far as possible from the conductor. At first, we went very fast. The carriages were not counted, but then fatigue took its toll, and we arranged a halt. The carriages were different. Some were old, dirty, and rusty. They smelled unpleasant and did not want to stop in them. Others, however, looked rather new and clean. In one of these, we sat down. "Let's drink the gull, Valer," a breathless Uncle Jora croaked, taking out the thermos from the bag that we found in a backpack and a couple of some sweets. The lid of the thermos also served as a glass, and a plastic piano was inserted into it. Thus, the thermos was designed for 2 people. I drank from the lid glass and Uncle Jora from the piano. Uncle Jor, you talked about some law enforcement officers. What is the local police? Yes, like that, he said, slurping tea. I myself did not see them, Lech told me. He had appeared here before. So, there were 3 passengers of theirs. Lyoka himself, Seryoga, and Stasik half. Stasik lived here long before Lyoki and Seryoga. They say he liked it here. In our world, he did not have housing, and here the food is free and the roof over his head. He even managed to make a brashka from various fruits and sweets that he mined in bags. Once they found a note. And it says that the outfit can be called into the carriage if you press the call button and not paying attention to the noises to shout the phrase, "We have an emergency in the carriage." And then it was said that they say it is better not to do this because 2 duty officers will appear and they will drag the first one with them, and you will not see him again. And that it is useless to resist. Their strength is incredible and looks so that the knees cough up. When Lyoka read the note into the ear, Stasik began to laugh and stand out. Say, nonsense. This is all about the duty. I pressed these buttons 100 times and did not see anyone. Stasik was heavily under the fly from his mug, and he began to swear loudly. They say in the coffin he saw all the cops that he would smear them with one left, and everything is in that spirit. Then, according to Lyoki's story, Stasik ran up to the button, pressed and screamed, "We have an emergency in the car!" A rattle and hissing burst out of the speakers, but Stasik still yelled at the top of his throat, "We have an emergency in the carriage!" Lex said that he and Seryoga wanted to drag him away from the button. But then this happened that they remained in place as dug in. Two broke in from the vestibule. One hefty, to the ceiling, the other waist-deep. Faces in terrible scars, on both remnants of the form. Blue shirts battered in brown spots. The big man's hands are such that the sleeves have burst. Both barefoot but with shoulder straps. Growl like bears. The glasses are red and frenzied. They grabbed Stasik and let's Mutuz him, beat all his teeth to him, broke his face in the blood. Then they twisted, handcuffed and fired by the legs where they came from. Lex said that he and Sariga were numb to what they saw. For a long time later, they were afraid to go further along the cars. But the conductor was driving from behind, and they had to continue moving. They have not seen Stasik since then, and the blue trail from him was interrupted in the transition between the cars. It was as if all three had just dissolved there. Serious things. I didn't know what to say. Then we noticed that the train began to slow down. It looks like it's going to be a station. Looking out the window, Uncle Jorah said thoughtfully. And another passenger is possible. What are passengers not at every station? I was surprised. No, he answered. Sometimes the train stands at the station for quite a long time, as if waiting for its prey. But she does not always manage to snatch another poor fellow from our world. And if we get off at the station and dissuade the passenger from entering, I blurted out, "You're a naive Valera. You will not see a passenger. Do not forget us with them in different realities. He is at the station in our home world, and you and I don't understand where." Meanwhile, the train sneaked crawling to the station and finally stopped. The doors hissed and clanked. Something was not clear from the speakers. The station was a 2-story building with broken, dark windows. An empty nighttime platform was illuminated by a pair of dim lanterns. In the wall of the building, there was a single unbroken and latched window in which the light was dimly burning, and above it the letters "Cass" were visible. Further, the letters either fell off or never had them, but it was clear that this was a cash register. The atmosphere of desolation and half-darkness was downright mystical. "Can I go out for reconnaissance?" I asked. "You can. Only when you hear a voice from the speakers, then immediately enter the car. Otherwise, you will stay here forever." "What's in the building?" I didn't let up. "It's better not to rush there," Uncle Jorah warned. "There such creatures live that you will not be happy. Come on, if you see anyone on the street, run from all your feet into the carriage. As a rule, they do not rush here. It seems that they are not supposed to, but if caught on the street, devour. Stop aggravating that Uncle Jorah. I'm scared to go out now." "And then," Uncle Jorah said meaningfully, "I myself never go out. Above this strange world hung an eternal frosty night. But I still decided to get out of the car because my plan was ripe. I decided to walk to the ticket office and try to buy a ticket. Leaving the carriage, I felt a strong frost. Strangely, there was no snow anywhere. I just paid attention to it now. Looking around, I saw carriages going into the dark of the woods on both sides. Is it really endless? I thought, slowly moving to the checkout. The cash window was cloudy, but behind the dusty glass there was a cashier's silhouette. It was not possible to see in detail the occupant of the cash register, and I did not really want to. At the bottom of the window, I saw a rusty tray extended into the street. Throwing 500 there, I pushed him to the box office and said, 2 tickets. At the same time, showed 2 fingers through the window in case I was poorly heard at the box office. The silhouette in the window fussed, and suddenly a tray with a 500 was knocked back, and from behind the window there was an inarticulate roar and some swearing. I jumped out of surprise. The heart was pounding. I looked at the doorway in the building. I was uncomfortable with the idea that any of its inhabitants would hear a noise and go to the platform. But everything worked out. Carefully taking my 500 from the tray, I turned my head towards the carriage, and I saw some kind of movement. Having climbed closer, I saw the shape of the figure under the carriage, or rather only the back of it. Standing on all fours and sticking his head under the carriage, there was a hefty type in a dirty orange vest. Next to him on the platform lay a hammer and some other tool. Under the carriage, his dissatisfied grumbling and metal tapping were heard. He probably eliminated some kind of breakdown in the lower part of the carriage. Probably a local mechanic. And as soon as he didn't notice me, it was with horror that I thought. I wanted to urgently dive into the carriage until the mechanic spotted me. But then I saw that the red crust of the certificate was sticking out of the back pocket of his dirty trousers. Probably this is a certificate of a railway worker, flashed in my head, and the plan immediately matured. I crept up from the rear with mechanics, abruptly grabbed a certificate from his pocket, and rushed to the car doors. His reaction was just a beast, and he immediately roared after me. Having lost precious seconds climbing the iron steps of the car, I already felt in the vestibule that the mutant was catching up with me. Pushing the doors into the car on the left, where Uncle Zor was waiting for me, I rushed towards the tail of the train. The doors had not yet closed behind me, as I felt that the mechanic had grabbed me by the leg. Having collapsed to the floor, I was able to grab onto the leg of the first seat. Standing on the platform, the mechanic reached with his incredibly long hands to me, and this despite the fact that I was already in the carriage. Uncle Zor, with a frightened face, rushed to my aid. He grabbed my clothes and began to pull as hard as he could into the carriage. The situation became stalemate. The conductor inevitably approached us from the tail of the train, and the hydraulic hand of the mechanic pulled me forward without exaggeration. The forces were not equal, and Uncle Zora and I understood that the mechanic would now pull me out of the carriage like a cork from a bottle. We rested with our last strength. Uncle Zora shouted at me to hold on, but my hand extended numb fingers one at a time. We looked at each other in horror and said goodbye mentally. Suddenly, I remembered the emergency call button of the outfit. With some incredible effort, I reached her and pressed the scream at the top of my throat. "P.E. in our car! P. in our car!" And then the real horror began. An outfit of 2 mutants burst into the vestibule, and the first person to hit their arm was a mechanic who invaded the train waist deep and dragged me by the leg from the carriage. A second later, I heard the crunch of broken bones and the wild scream of a mechanic. A bloodbath began in the vestibule. The car jumped as if a herd of elephants was dancing on its roof. These 2 goblins pulled the mechanic into the vestibule and simply disassembled it for parts. At the same time, the growls and screams were so strong that they laid their ears. Uncle Zora exhaled, pulled me into the middle of the carriage. Turning around, I saw that the mechanic's torn hand was still holding my leg and dragging behind me, leaving a bloody trail, and the rest of it was flying through the vestibule under the blows of the attendants, knocking out the glass in the car door. We looked numb at what was happening. Suddenly, the mechanic died, and through the broken glass, we saw how these 2 busily dragged his remains into the transition between the cars. Exhausted, we sat on the floor of the carriage. An inarticulate but expressive announcement was heard from the speakers again. The train closed the doors with a hiss and continued its endless voyage through the vastness of the strange world. "Valera, why the F? Did you hook this mutant?" Uncle Zora squeaked viciously. I took a freshly stolen ID out of my pocket and gave it to Uncle Jore. "Who is it for you?" Holding his heart, he continued. I will present it to the ticket office and get a couple of local tickets so that we can dump from this fucking train. I breathed. The theory is of course interesting, colleague, he snarled. Only because of this, your head was almost torn off. Come on, Uncle Jor. It all worked out. But now, at the next station, I will get tickets for us. I'm already afraid to imagine what it will look like. Returning the crust to me, he continued to snort. I smirked and opened my ID to see this trophy. It was as caricatured as everything in this incomprehensible world. Even lines consisted of a cross of Cyrillic and Latin letters. Capital and capital letters were arranged in random order. It was impossible to read anything, but everything was serious, even a photo of the owner with a large round seal. The shrunken face in the photo was disgusting. The eyes, one of which was taller than the other, expressed a complete lack of intelligence. The humpless mouth was chipped with large and yellow horse teeth. 2 gaps instead of the nose and huge ears complemented the picture. Uncle Jor, what do you think the cashier will notice that in the photo I am not? Come on, you're just like twins, just one face. He gave out a hoarse laugh. After this joke, we resolutely could not get up from the floor. Adrenaline left the vessels of our bodies and nervous laughter covered us. We laughed to colic, to tears rolling on the floor. When we laughed, I tried to free my leg from the mechanic's hand clinging to it. But it turned out to be more than simple. The grip of his fingers was literally dead. His arm was ripped straight out of his shoulder, 2 meters long and very weighty. It was like a weight hanging on my leg. Apparently, the spasm closed huge fingers with an iron grip, and the dead hand did not want to let go of my leg. Cut tendons. Handing me his knife said, Uncle Jora. I took a knife and began to cut the back of the dead palm. My fingers began to weaken in turn, and I was finally able to free my leg. In the darkness of the car, on the floor lay a huge hand of a mechanic. Her brush, like a predatory spider, swayed in the beat of the train, and we wanted to leave this car as soon as possible. It seemed that now the hand would come to life and cling to someone's throat. Uncle Jor, let's get out of here. I suggested it. It is painful not to wait for the conductor. He silently took his bag, and we carefully walked around to the vestibule. Opening the doors, we saw a nightmare picture. The vestibule was covered with the blood of a mechanic. It dripped from the ceiling, drained from the walls, and knocked out teeth. Some bloody noise and a huge eye were lying on the floor. Shards of knocked out glasses were crumbling under their feet. There were dents on the walls and doors from the blows. What he saw penetrated us to the bone. We became scared to move on. What if these two are waiting for us in the next vestibule? Uncle Jora entered the passage between the carriages. The trail of blood was interrupted there. He slightly opened the door of the vestibule of the neighboring carriage. It was empty there. Nothing suspicious about the carriage either. Valor, we have to go through 10-12 carriages so that we can safely eat and nap, Uncle Jor said without stopping. Not a question. Limping, I answered. After the iron grip of the mechanic, the leg was pampering, but I was ready to suffer just to get away from that bloody carriage and the impending conductor. After passing 3 carriages, we found a large plastic bag and a handbag. The bag contained expensive sausage, cognac, half a shot of cola, fruit, chocolate, and a can of olives. A pink handbag lay next to it, and on it flashed a rhinestone of 3 Latin letters, NGA. Inside, a standard ladies' set. Nothing interesting but a stun gun that we took with us. Uncle Jora transferred the found products into his bag, and we moved on. After another 9 cars, they decided to make a halt. We got food and arranged for ourselves a small pirushka with a cognac. Then the fatigue took its toll and we dozed off. I woke up from the fact that Uncle Jora shook my shoulder. What happened to Uncle Jor? I jumped. The train stopped, he said. Another station. I looked out the window. In the dark, a concrete cash register booth stood on an empty platform and a pair of broken benches nearby under a rusty canopy. The This entire nighttime landscape was illuminated by a barely living lantern on a pole. The window of the ticket office flickered faintly, as if a candle was burning there or the electric lamp had bad contact. I went out onto the platform and inhaled frosty air. Uncle Jora stood in the vestibule and watched me. "Uncle Jor, why isn't there snow?" I asked quietly from the platform. "Winter seems to be in the yard." "I don't know," he answered. "How much I am going here, I have never seen snow." Looking around, I slowly approached the window of the cash register, put a certificate stolen from a mechanic and a 500 in a rusty tray, creaked the tray into the bowels of the cash register, and he said loudly, "2 tickets," while showing 2 fingers in the window. Behind the cloudy glass there was not a small such shadow. Slurred muttering was heard, and after a few seconds the tray popped out. It contained a certificate, my 502 tickets made of thick cardboard. At that moment, an inarticulate announcement was heard from the loudspeakers, and I realized that the train would now start. Having taken with me everything that was in the tray, I rushed into the carriage and barely jumped into the vestibule. The doors closed. "Well, what?" Uncle Jora said in impatience. I handed him 1 ticket. "Get over it," Uncle Jor gave out, carefully picking up a small cardboard with a seal and a series of random letters. "This is local tickets," he continued. "Yes. This is yours and this is mine." I demonstrated my ticket, and they got it for free. Apparently, 1 certificate is enough. The train, meanwhile, was gaining speed, and we got into the car and sat down on the sofa. "Uncle Zor, let's wait for the conductor, and I will present him with a ticket in the aisle. You'll be a little behind me, standing in the aisle as well. Low start, so to speak. If suddenly this mutant does not like the ticket, then we will have a chance to run away from it. Well, if everything goes fine, then you will show him your ticket." "A good plan." Uncle Zor nodded approvingly. "Only here Lyoku is sorry." I continued. "Will he be here forever?" "We still can't catch up with him. He's gone far ahead." Uncle Jora answered. "He and Sergei themselves chose their own path. Sergei died, and I am not sure if Lyoka is now alive. And you and I had a chance. It is risky, but we must check it. Uncle Jor, what's going on behind the conductor? Why do the cars disappear behind him?" "Yes, I don't really know. Maybe the car itself becomes a certain portal through which you can get into our world. We did not want to leave this carriage. It seemed that it brought good luck, and it was in it that our tickets would be happy." After a while, we heard a bang of the door in the vestibule and saw the conductor. He hardly squeezed into the car door. His inseparable mutterings instilled some kind of quiet horror. I wanted to run immediately, but having Kopit with me, I took a stun gun from Uncle Jora just in case and walked it into the middle of the car. Having pulled out a ticket in my hand, I stood ready in case of failure to run away from here. Uncle Jora stood 5 steps behind me in the same readiness to leave the carriage. We understood that the conductor would not run after us, but his inhuman reaction and long arms, buckets, made us alert. Groping the space of the carriage, he slowly approached me. In his muttering, I distinguished several times the phrase, "Present the ticket." Finally, he groped my outstretched hand with the ticket, carefully took it, and reached into the bag for his control device. My heart was pounding at a terrible speed. I squeezed a stun gun in my hand and prepared to bounce back if a nasty buzzer swore in his apparatus. Taking out his strange typewriter, he put my ticket into it. The machine rustled contentedly, squeaked briefly, and a green light bulb caught fire on it. The conductor extracted my ticket from the car and muttered the word "order" and handed the perforated ticket to me. I took a ticket and sat down to sit down. The conductor, groping the carriage, moved on to Uncle Jora. Uncle Jora, seeing that the tickets were suitable, calmed down a little and also crouched down on the sofa. I watched what was happening from behind this mutant, but I was afraid to prick at least a word so as not to scare my luck. Uncle Jor, like me, successfully passed control, and the conductor began to squeeze into the vestibule. groping which reached into the next carriage. For a while, Uncle Jora and I sat in our seats as dumbfounded and could not figure out what to do next. Our car did not disappear anywhere. Nothing changed. The train continued to go through the night taiga. Then Uncle Jora stood up and silently approached me. He looked at me and I looked at him. "What's next?" For some reason I whispered, "I don't know." He answered, "Let's check the previous car. Maybe it disappeared." I suggested it, and we went to check. When we entered the vestibule of the neighboring carriage and made sure that it did not disappear, they froze from surprise. The light was on in the carriage, and there were people in it. The second wave of numbness covered Uncle Jora and I. We stood silently as dug in the vestibule and looked at the passengers through the glass in the doors. There were not many of them. A young couple with a girl running along the carriage, a serious man with a briefcase, and two lively grannies. I don't know how long we stood like that, but Uncle Jora was the first to come to his senses. I did not understand. He pulled it out. "Are we back? Why didn't our carriage disappear?" It was clear that a bunch of questions were swarming in his head. His face expressed some distrust of what was happening, as if he suspected that all this was some next experiment and the passengers in the carriage were not real. Then he slowly turned around and went into our carriage, opened the doors to the vestibule, and we saw that the light was also on there and the passengers were driving. A minute ago, it was an empty and dark car of a ghostly train, and now there are passengers. We go as if nothing had happened. "Valera, our carriage is gone. It's different instead." "Sure," I answered. "It turns out that this happens. You need to go to another car to get into our world." Uncle Jora stepped into the carriage. I am behind him. We slowly walked down the aisle looking at the passengers, then into another carriage, then into the third. Gawking at people, we looked ridiculous, and probably everyone mistook us for some crazy homeless people. We gradually realized that we managed to escape from the terrible world of the ghostly train. The people around were real. Everyone went about their business. Uncle Jora turned to me. Tears could be seen in his eyes. Apparently, in that dark world, he lost faith that he could someday return. "We succeeded," he said, and gave me a paternal hug. I put him in an embrace, too. We were overwhelmed by a wave of joy. Our legs became cotton and we sat down. Our faces shone with happiness, and the train began to slow down, and the woman's voice announced that the stop was called 666th kilometer, and that the next station was Liski. We still did not know where we were because each of us entered the ghostly train from different cities, but apparently it was possible to get out of it only here on a platform of 666 kilometers. It was here that the reverse portal was. It was still dark outside the window, but it was clearly another train, and now we knew where we were going. It was our world.